Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got another just excellent show for you today. I am joined again by the one and only Niall Stanley, back from across the pond. No, you didn't actually go.
I didn't. We can say that. Make my lifestyle sound much more exotic than it actually is.
How have you been this week?
I have been very well, Robby, despite the fact that it is rather gloomy weather today in Washington, D.C.
Gloomy, gloomy, gloomy.
But we're bringing some light to proceedings. And you're going to bring more light to proceedings right now. That was a perfect segue there. Mm-hmm. What's on your radar, Robby?
Let there be light, I suppose. Two reporters have released a new book, Fight, Inside the Wildest Battle for the White House, that does shine new light on the extent of President Joe Biden's cognitive decline over the course of his re-election campaign and, of course, before. Amy Parnes, our colleague here at The Hill, and Jonathan Allen of NBC News gained access to Biden's inner circle, discovering that top officials had grave concerns about Biden's fitness for the presidency. These concerns long predated the public's own awareness of the extent of the decline. In fact, Vice President Kamala Harris had discussed plans, get this, for what to do in the event of Biden's sudden death, i.e., which judges she would want to swear her in as president. These plans were formulated by Jamal Simmons, a communications director who departed Harris's team in January 2023. In other words, Harris was thinking through worst-case scenarios as far back as that. By the time of Biden's disastrous July debate with President Donald Trump, the president's cognitive decline was so bad that aides had to help him navigate a home where a fundraiser was being held by placing fluorescent tape on the floor to guide him from spot to spot. Parnes and Allen confirmed the shocking detail in an interview with me on Rising. Let's watch.
You went to a small fundraiser, fluorescent tape on the floor to guide him where he needs to go. On foreign trips, there's a makeup artist who comes in first thing in the morning to kind of liven him up and do his makeup ahead of these meetings. He wasn't doing television, he was going into meetings. The first thing was to bring in this makeup artist to help him. And all of this we reveal in the book for the first
Fluorescent tape?
Yes. And,
to show him where to go at a fundraiser at Governor Phil Murphy's house. So a small place, and it's like fluorescent tape on the floor pointing him where to go in a house. And when he goes to speak to the donors outside, he's got a teleprompter, he's and a podium, in this small patio area. That night they go in for this private dinner, and he's talking about Ukraine, and he's kind of making sense, and then he starts trailing off. And this happens repeatedly, where he's kind of doing well and then trailing off. And finally, Biden sort of realizes what's going on himself.
You might have thought this fundraiser was being held in like the labyrinth of King Minos with a little monster in the middle of it. Well, it was not. It was held at the residence of New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy. Now, Murphy, to be clear, has a very big house, and repairs and renovations to that mansion actually cost the New Jersey taxpayers $862,000. Thank you very much for that, I suppose. Nevertheless, the fact that Biden needed flashy visual cues just to survive a friendly fundraising event obviously raised serious and immediate questions about his ability to fulfill the more demanding aspects of his job as president. And yet, top Biden surrogates maintained that he was totally capable of remaining president, even after he had exited his re-election campaign. Ron Klain, Biden's former chief of staff, asserted in August 2024 that Biden was, quote, clearly up to the job. He's doing it every day, said Klain. He's doing it successfully. Now, Klain doesn't even have the excuse that he was obligated to say something positive about Biden because he was working for him. At that point, he was out of the job. I guess personal loyalty matters more than the truth. That's fine, but then why do we still take these people seriously? That was then, though. Now, Klain is admitting the truth. He told reporter Chris Whipple, who has also released a tell-all book on the real story of the Biden campaign, he says that Klain told him the following. Klain, Whipple writes, quote, wondered half seriously if Biden thought he was president of NATO instead of the U.S. He just became very enraptured with being the head of NATO, he said. That wouldn't help him on Capitol Hill because, as Klain noted, domestic political leaders don't really care what Emmanuel Macron and Olaf Scholz think. Yeah. President of NATO. That's what every far-right conservative commentator accuses Biden of having prioritized the interests of NATO over the U.S. Now, Klain scheduled a practice debate as well for Biden. It was supposed to go for 90 minutes, but Biden could only make it through 45 minutes, at which point, quote, again, this is according to Whipple's book, The president's voice was shot, and so was his grasp of the subject. All he really could do was talk about his infrastructure plan and how he was rebuilding America and 16 million jobs. He had nothing to say about his agenda for a second term." End quote. Given all that, I mean, it's no wonder Biden lost. It's sort of remarkable that he didn't actually resign the presidency, instead did serve out his time despite these obvious impairments. Here's my question. It's a question I've asked many times. Does anyone actually have trust now in high-level political operatives like Ron Klain, or important politicians like Kamala Harris, who surely knew, or Democratic spokespeople like Karine Jean-Pierre, who absolutely knew? Haven't they discredited themselves forever? They were perfectly happy to pretend the president was capable of fulfilling his duties when we know they knew he absolutely was not. And it's sort of beyond question at this point. So this is something we've discussed a lot on this show, Niall, but we'll continue discussing it a lot because now people are coming out with books on the subject, really digging into the details. And Amy Parnes did a great job, who we did that interview with earlier this week. Really fantastic book that everybody should check out. This Whipple book sounds interesting too. Everybody admitting, yeah, it was so bad, and it was so bad for so long. And maybe it's an indictment of the media at the time for failing to notice how apparent it was. What's your take?
Yeah, I mean, I have a mixed take. Look, I don't think that anyone now denies that there was a serious cognitive decline. I do think that decline accelerated over the course of Biden's term. So even at the start of his presidency, he was, I think, more vigorous and more tuned in than he was by the end. I do think it is, I mean, like you, I'm obviously looking forward to digging in properly to Amy and John's book. In relation to some of the apparent duplicity that we would talk about there, that seems pretty clear that people did know and didn't say, and are now coming out and saying it. Now, who exactly knew what they should have said, all of those things get, I think, a little complicated because the decision stemmed from Biden. If Biden had decided to be a transitional president and hand over the reins after one term, that would be a completely different situation. I don't, whether it's Ron Klain or anyone else, I'm not sure. What are you supposed to say if the President of the United States says, yes, I'm going forward, I'm well able to do this? Whether you're working for him or not, do you say publicly, no, he can't? There are people, not to be all like, what about Trump? But I mean, do people who are close to Donald Trump really think he's a completely stable personality who thinks through all the decisions that he makes while president? I don't think they do think that. But they're not coming out and saying, well, this guy's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I hear that, and you're right that the original sin was Biden's decision to run for re-election, and everything flows downstream from that. Everything that happened was kind of inevitable based on his decision to do that. I guess one does hope, and one can be an anti-Trump figure who takes the view that, yes, people in his inner circle should resign in protest, should speak up, should say to the media, this person is a maniac and shouldn't be in control. I think liberal media would celebrate them for doing that.
Sure.
But I guess I would have some hope that even independent, I mean, that's sort of an ideological judgment. I know maybe liberal people think it's beyond ideology and he's just such a reprehensible maniac. But I guess if the president had a stroke and was completely incapacitated, I hope they wouldn't try to cover it. I hope someone, and then if other people were going to try to cover it up, I would hope that someone would leak to the press that you have no idea how bad the president is actually physically incapacitated. Now, this has happened throughout our history. Obviously, FDR was in a wheelchair, and the media was complicit in covering that up. That doesn't speak to his actual mental faculties whatsoever. Woodrow Wilson was quite incapacitated after serious disease for the end of his presidency, and a lot of decisions were actually being made by his wife, Edith Wilson. So I think in this media climate, this scoop-chasing, hungry media climate, you wouldn't be able to get away with something like that. But they kind of did for a while. They didn't totally, but they kind of did.
And the people who did report on it often got very serious, vigorous pushback from the White House.
Interesting stuff. Well, we'll have a lot more topics to talk about on Rising today. Please stay with us. We're just getting started. Well, President Trump followed through yesterday on one of his campaign promises. He imposed sweeping tariffs on practically every country in the world.
Of course, there are many concerns that his tariffs will drastically impact markets and raise prices at home. But the president seems to think there's a brighter future ahead.
we truly can be very wealthy. We can be so much wealthier than any country. It's not even believable. The United States can no longer continue with a policy of unilateral economic surrender. We cannot pay the deficits of Canada, Mexico, and so many other countries. We used to do it. We can't do it anymore. We take care of countries all over the world. We pay for their military. We pay for everything they have to pay. And then when you want to cut back a little bit, they get upset that you're not taking care of them any longer. But we have to take care of our people, and we're going to take care of our people first. And I'm sorry to say that.
Here's a list of some notable Trump tariffs. Of course, the most eyebrow-raising one is the 700% tariff on rice from Japan. Trump's tariffs on China are up to 54%. Then there's a 20% tariff on the European Union, 32% tariff on Taiwan, 26% on India, 49% on Cambodia, among others. Trump is also imposing reciprocal tariffs on 60 countries that will take effect on April 9th.
Of course, while some of these countries vehemently disagree with Trump's approach, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent had a message for them.
My advice to every country right now is do not retaliate. Sit back, take it in, let's see how it goes, because if you retaliate, there will be escalation. If you don't retaliate, this is the high watermark.
The Chamber of Commerce's Executive Vice President, Neil Bradley, said in a statement, "What we have heard from businesses of all sizes across all industries from around the country is that these broad tariffs are a tax increase that will raise prices for American consumers and hurt the economy."
For U.S. Trade Representative under former President Bush, Robert Zoellick, he said beyond the direct impact of the tariffs themselves, the constant flip-flops create confusion, adding a cost of uncertainty that impedes planning, especially for small businesses. What's more, the inevitable retaliation, some we're already seeing, will hurt America's successful exporters, especially farmers and cutting-edge machinery and service industries. Speaker Mike Johnson, on the other hand, defended Trump's move. Writing on X, President Trump is sending a clear message with Liberation Day. America will not be exploited by unfair trade practices anymore. These tariffs restore fair and reciprocal trade and level the playing field for American workers and innovators. The president understands that free trade only works when it's fair. So here we are, Niall, and I'm in the unenviable position of being, the right of center commentator, but I do not agree with everything the Republican Party does or that Trump does, just as you don't agree with everything the Democratic Party does or Biden or Kamala Harris do. This is maybe the singular issue at which I am most at odds with what President Trump is doing. Now, I am not alone in that regard, as are virtually all leading conservative intellectuals, free market economists, editorial pages. And I know it's not, and I hear that, so just whatever big business wants should be the country's policy, and I don't agree with that. And when Trump says, we bail out, we pay for these countries' militaries and all those things, I'm like, okay, well, cut that. Then don't do that. That is just directly giving our money to other countries. Let's cut that out. I'm all for it. But the reality is that the tariffs are tax increases. They will make things more expensive for working Americans. They will make it harder for small businesses because our economies are so integrated across the globe. Even if you're doing something that is narrowly good for one industry, well, what if that industry relies on lumber or steel or machine parts or food or energy that is coming from somewhere else in the world, so now you're raising the cost of that. We're basically all just deciding that everything should be less efficient and more expensive for everyone everywhere. The best possible result of this would be for everyone to admit the tariffs are a bad idea and for other countries to get rid of those as well. I hear Trump on the, well, if they're so bad, why are they doing it? Well, they shouldn't be doing it either. But just because they're shooting themselves in the foot doesn't mean we have to do that too. And so I hope the response to this is okay, let's all end tariffs. But in the short term, this is going to hurt very badly.
Yeah, and I think it is one of those issues where Trump's propensity for sloganeering or for easy solutions easily leads itself into very self-defeating conclusions and self-defeating policies. Because his argument, he has actually two arguments that are in conflict with one another, in my view. One is the idea that this is going to revitalize American manufacturing. If that's the case, you have to keep tariffs in place for years while factories get built and supply chains change and all of that. Then the other alternative is, it's this sort of Trump flexing of the muscle to draw concessions from other nations. Maybe it's that, but if it's that, you want a quick fix and you don't want it dragging on for years. But I think sometimes some specifics are useful in this, and I was looking up Bangladesh at random. There's a 37% tariff imposed now on Bangladesh. The main export of Bangladesh to the United States is garments, t-shirts and all the rest of it. The average wage in Bangladesh is $213 a month. The average wage in the United States is about $5,500. Now, obviously, factory workers lower than both those levels, but there isn't any conceivable tariff or any conceivable price point that makes that a viable option in the long term, that we're suddenly going to revitalize the American t-shirt making industry. Yes. That's just simply not going to happen.
Yes. And if they were, and let's say they're what we were bringing in from them was some other product that is essential to some other business, that then what if you could always narrowly benefit one firm. I mean, the U.S. government could just say, here's $1 gazillion for whatever company, and you would make it economically profitable for that company to hire more people and build more factories at the expense of, it's the seen cost, the seen benefit versus the unseen costs, right? Okay, but then what are you crushing with the heavy hand of government in order to support that one thing? Generally, a competitive market is the best. They're not perfect, and we need government intervention for a variety of reasons, or to just provide general welfare to people. But pretty much the last century has proved the government being overly involved in trying to make bets about which precise firm or industry needs this much support and which one doesn't, and having it all done through a central authority creates crippling poverty.
Well,
every time.
And actually worsened the Great Depression back in around 1930, when there was an attempt to do protectionist policies around that time, and it was a catastrophe.
Yeah.
So, it's a big problem.
And if you want to look, I hear, people like my friends like Batya Ungar-Sargon, who these are the kind of policies she wants, and she's out talking very eloquently in their favor. I hear you on the working class has taken some hits, and all of the benefits that have come from globalization and free trade. The people on the left, and then some people in my own kind of new right coalition like Batya will say, but are those benefits just going to already wealthy people? Are they really going to the working people? But what it's going to take to be able to have factories and factory jobs here again is not going to be tariffs that are done for diplomatic reasons, as an FU to Canada or whatever, because that's not enough certainty to start the process of building a factory and like a long-term business plan. What it would actually take to do that, it can be done, but it's things people on the left don't want to do. And in terms of NEPA, environmental protection, I think even some of that, maybe you could get left or progressive people on board with getting away with. This new Ezra Klein book on abundance has so many examples of just pointless. You need an environmental action impact report on anything, even things that have nothing to do with the environment, that just slows everything down. If you got rid of some of that, you could make it possible to maybe relocate some of these factories in the U.S. and other permanent fixes like that. The tariffs are not going to be a permanent fix because we're not even talking about them as being permanent.
Right.
Listen to Scott Bessent there. He's like, well, just hold on. This is being done for a reason.
Sure.
Bear the pain now. And that's as you said, it's a contradiction. It's an entirely different argument. If it's like 5 days of pain and then the rest of the world gets rid of all their tariffs, yeah, I'll say it was a success. I will be the first one to say, great, I'm glad. But that's not going to be about a industry building policy here.
It's not going to regenerate American manufacturing. Also, this is a separate conversation in a way, but part of the reason that American manufacturing and manufacturing generally has declined has been the rise of automation. It hasn't purely been the stealing of jobs from overseas. And we'll see whether Trump and the broader public are willing to bear the short-term pain that we're already seeing. The stock market was down at its open about 3%, I think, in the S&P 500 instantly. So
there's no sure way to wreck your mandate to govern by harming the economy. It's the economy, stupid. The Bill Clinton insight, it's correct every time. So we will see how this goes. Next up is Musk actually exiting Doge sooner than we think. We will discuss. Will he stay or will he go now? Did I have the beat right on that one, Niall?
I don't know. Well,
no.
I'm not sure that the Clash would be happy with it, but we'll give it a go.
Oh, well, we are talking, of course, about special government employee Elon Musk, who is only allowed to serve in his current role for 130 days per year.
That means that his time would be up in late May or early June. Politico magazine reported Wednesday, however, that Musk's time may already be running out. The outlet writes, President Donald Trump has told his inner circle, including members of his cabinet, that Elon Musk will be stepping back in the coming weeks from his current role as governing partner, ubiquitous cheerleader, and Washington hatchet man. President Trump himself likes Musk and is apparently pleased with his work, but Politico reports that others close to the president don't feel that way. But many close to Trump are increasingly relieved that Musk is expected to soon move on from his central role at Trump's side, and that the litany of Doge surprises, which have ranged from a weekend email blast demanding federal workers list their work output to accidental cuts to Ebola prevention programs, might finally be coming to a close. That's to say nothing of their concerns about Musk as a political liability, who has served as a rallying point for fractured Democrats.
White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt pushed back on Politico's report. She was on News Nation this morning. Let's watch.
That's a question for Elon Musk himself. This is a non-story. The president and Elon have both said publicly that Elon will leave when the mission of Doge is complete, when he feels his work is over. And the work he's been doing is incredible. He is saving the American taxpayers from bankruptcy. He is saving them billions of dollars in wasteful spending on useless priorities overseas. He has shown a light on the corruption, the waste, the fraud, and abuse that has plagued our federal bureaucracy for far too long. And the president, I can tell you, is very grateful for his efforts and for the risk that Elon Musk was willing to take. He's taken a lot of heat for this public service, and he's a special government employee. There's an expiration date on that, and he has said he will leave at that expiration date or when he feels the mission of Doge is complete, if it's before that SGE expiration date.
The New York Post ran a similar story on Wednesday. It was titled, "Here's Why Elon Musk May Leave His Doge Position Sooner Than You Think." The Post sources told them, plan has always been to let Musk return to civilian life after his SGE status expires, and Trump himself recently alluded to the ex-boss's departure coming sooner rather than later.
While there are conflicting reports as to whether Musk is leaving soon, perhaps the bigger question is, should he leave soon? The results of a Marquette Law School survey don't look great for the tech titan. 41% in that poll approve of Musk's handling of Doge work, while 58% disapprove. 38% view Musk himself favourably, while 60% view him unfavourably.
Or perhaps Musk himself might want to leave sooner than expected to attend to his businesses. Tesla's global sales, for instance, have dropped 13% in the first 3 months of 2025, which is the largest in the company's history. The car company's global sales also dropped 13% compared to last year's first quarter. Heck, even the mother of Musk's latest child is ditching her Tesla, albeit probably for different reasons. Let's watch.
I'm selling it because I need to make up for the 60% cut that Elon made to our son's child support.
The Musk family drama.
Yeah, a lot of family drama with Elon, but a lot of political drama too.
I don't know. Elon is a very divisive, very disliked figure among Democrats. That much is clear. He is disliked more strongly than Trump, I think, even by strong partisans at this point, especially by strong partisans.
He's certainly more disliked by people in the middle ground as well, actually, but go ahead.
Yes, and he does not have crossover appeal the way that Trump is just a interesting figure, I guess, to spectate. Elon is interesting in a less enjoyable way for people who don't agree with him and don't love him. Obviously, there's millions of those as well. But I have never, so given that the media and Democrats tend to hate him that much, I'm always a little distrustful of these stories that are predicting some Trump-Musk falling out. I've seen no evidence of that from Trump himself or in the conversations I've had with people, not literally in the room with the individuals, but I have some contacts and some sources on the right. It seems to me like their fondness for each other is fairly genuine in a way that two highly idiosyncratic, successful in different ways, it's lonely at the top. They really value each other in some way. Now, all that said, it's, politics is a business, and Elon has his business interests, and his time as a special government employee is going to expire anyway. So it may very well be the case that he steps back from politics, but I would still, he might step back from being special government employee and being involved with Doge. I actually have a hard time imagining him not continuing to be extremely involved in Republican politics for at least the duration of this Trump term.
Where we differ in emphasis, I think, is that it seems to me really very clear that Musk is a political liability for Trump. As you say, his numbers are worse than Trump in almost every respect. One of the interesting things to me is he's massively unpopular among women, and I've referenced this before, but I'm just looking through 3 separate
Including
polls.
the 13 of them he's had children.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's particularly deeply unpopular with them, but there's a Quinnipiac poll where he's like 40 points underwater in terms of favourability with women. Very bad numbers with independents. And then you look at things that he's actually done or said. So there was Social Security's a giant Ponzi scheme. There was the thing that happened with Doge where people were fired working on nuclear safety or on avian flu and then rehired back again. There have been various incendiary comments about judges, judicial coups and all that. But I think what really put a fine point on this was the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, where he and his allies spent $21 million to no apparent effect at all. The Liberal candidate there won by a virtually identical margin
Because money
to
in
the last time
politics
around.
isn't everything. You can't actually buy elections. I say it over and over again.
That-
It can't compensate for other candidate shortfalls.
It is the case that money does not guarantee victory, but whether that means that it is healthy to have one individual spending $20 million on a Supreme Court race in a particular state is a completely different question. And so Musk is a drag on Trump politically. I was always skeptical of they're going to have a huge falling out argument for a different reason, which is that I think Trump cares very much and always has about how he is perceived, and Elon Musk, as the proprietor of X, has a lot of influence in that way.
That's it, yes.
And I think that Trump doesn't want to alienate him. In
That part I agree with. And you're not wrong about your analysis of how Musk is being received, but I wonder how much, like, Musk is not on the ballot, like, Musk would not make for an appealing political candidate, right? For all the reasons you make him out to be. But as a hype man for the right, a promoter of Trump talking points throughout the social media mechanisms he commands, and as someone who is willing to spend millions and millions of dollars on Trump causes, I think he's still a huge net benefit, even if having him in the so maybe the best role is for him to take a step back from being front and center so much. Now that's a difficult thing to ask someone who is this powerful to do. If Musk wants the spotlight, he's entitled to the spotlight. He has the spotlight. He owns the spotlights. He owns the lights.
Yeah, but I don't agree that he is a net benefit. I think that may be where we differ, because I think that what gets confused with Elon Musk is the enthusiasm, which is genuine, of people who are fans of his, people who are very pro-Elon, versus how he plays with the general population, which seems to me overwhelmingly negative.
Yeah, he's also going through something in terms of his personal behavior. I mean, he tweets so much, there's just no way to describe it as anything other than unhealthy. It's in the middle of the night all the time.
It's often pretty erratic messaging, to be honest.
The things he says are a little out there. It has been reported by the mainstream media that there are concerns about his drug use, specifically his ketamine use, which I actually think explains a lot of this. Simultaneously, he is, like the most successful businessman of all time. It is not, I know some people on the left will say, oh, he just inherited all this wealth and that's why. It's what he did with Tesla and with SpaceX is truly historically unprecedented in terms of how successful those companies are, and people bet against him all the while, said this was impossible, there's no way to make this work, and he makes things work. So I'm always a little bit to just, like, he's not an idiot. Now, that doesn't mean he's right about everything he says, or that he's not also crazy, or sometimes very personally erratic people are very successful at other things. He clearly does not. He is the first to admit that he has some form of autism and does not quite get personal interactions in ways that it leaves people uncomfortable when they interact with him. That said, he is so unparalleled success in this realm of tech, and now he is, I think, a part of the story for how Trump was successfully reelected with more support than he was the first time. Now, that was before he's verging on public notoriety. He's now a political figure, and you're right that he's unpopular. So maybe he doesn't have a long future in this project after all. But it's just hard at this point to imagine what it looks like without him, because he's become so, for better or worse, a presence in our lives as political commentators.
I assume he could just stay on the outside and pontificate about various things. I just, to make a long story short, don't think that his business prowess extends or translates into political acumen, because I don't see much sign of that.
Next up, there's a new viral Netflix series about the effects of the Manosphere that has the internet buzzing. We will discuss that. It's really interesting. Stay tuned. Well, there's a new show on Netflix that is stirring a lot of discussion. It's called Adolescence.
The show is about a 13-year-old student who is accused of stabbing a fellow schoolmate to death. Stephen Graham, one of the co-creators, told the Associated Press that when incidents like this happen, people quickly jump to question the person's background or upbringing. Graham said, "But what if it's not the family? We're all maybe accountable. School, society, parents, community."
Which brings us to one of the reasons why the show is going viral. Apparently, part of the premise is that online figures in the Manosphere radicalized the 13-year-old boy and essentially led to him committing his crime. Influencer Andrew Tate, who has become famous in that ecosystem, is even mentioned by name.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer said he supports showing the Netflix series to secondary schools in Britain for free. Starmer told the AP that showing the series will help students understand the impact of online radicalisation and misogyny. Starmer said, quote, "There isn't one single policy lever to pull. It's actually a much bigger problem than that. And that's the devastating effect that the problem of misogyny has on our society."
Many on the right, however, criticizing the show and that line of scrutiny. Podcaster Ian Miles-Chong, for example, in a now viral tweet, he wrote, "Netflix has a show called Adolescence that's about a British knife killer who stabbed a girl to death on a bus, and it's based on real-life cases such as the Southport murderer." So guess what? They race-swapped the actual killer from a black man migrant to a white boy, and the story has it so he was radicalized online by the Red Pill movement, just the absolute state of anti-white propaganda.
The co-creator, Jack Thorne, however, said that no part of the series is based on a true story and denied Chong's claims. Thorne also said that history shows that kids of all races commit these kinds of crimes.
There are also other complaints from the right. Podcaster Jason Whitlock wrote on X, "I watched Netflix Adolescence last night. In one of the episodes, they're taunting a 13-year-old boy by calling him an incel. When I was a kid, no one thought this way. If you were 13 and sexually inactive, nobody thought you were lame. We've robbed the innocence of children and forced a sexual conversation on them." So this is a very fascinating discussion taking place. I have not seen the TV show yet. I know people who've seen it and who gave it a variety of reactions. They tended to be impressed with it on a technical basis. It's shot very well and acted very well.
And it's been hugely successful already.
It's been very successful. Now, I think the Labour government, adopting it as we need to really, this is an educational tool to really get to the bottom of an epidemic of misogyny that is fueling all this kind of violence. I think that's probably not a helpful framing, because we always want to be cognizant. That's like making a problem sound worse than it is. People do knife each other for all sorts of reasons. It is not, I would say it's not accurate to say that this is a particularly large category of crime. Obviously, kids do awful, including violent things, for a variety of reasons. It's not a huge category of crime. It seems a little trendy to say that Andrew Tate is aspiring, like ISIS or something, is aspiring attacks all over the world. It's not really taking place, I don't think. But there can be mistreatment or just bullying of women by men and men by women, and it can be discussed. But I think that's why the right is reacting to it. Like, you're saying this is the biggest problem ever, and it's inspiring all this violence, and that's not quite the case.
Yeah, but don't you think there is a genuine problem, or at least genuine cause for concern, in the rise of this manosphere that often, to me, puts forth a very, very caricatured version of masculinity? I mean, Andrew Tate speaks of himself as a misogynist and has made an abundance of appalling comments about women being men's property and this kind of thing, in addition to the fact that, of course, he's involved in a criminal case, which would take us too long to get into the specifics of all of that. But I do honestly think there is a real issue here about the influence of the online world pushing adolescent boys in particular into attitudes that are, in my view, unnecessarily antagonistic towards girls and women, unnecessarily misogynistic in some cases, certainly kind of hyper-masculine, in a way that I just find to be a kind of recipe for loneliness and unhappiness and a lack of meaningful relationships with the opposite sex.
Well, I don't disagree on any of that. I think Andrew Tate is an appalling figure, would be a terrible role model. He is just bad on every single front. He is being pushed back on by a lot of people on the right because they recognize him as a kind of, he's a kind of trafficker of pornography, and I'm libertarian. I'm for porn being legal and sex work being legal, but it just is a gratuitous ownership of and violence towards women, and actually also on top of everything else, he's sympathetic to a terrorist figure. He was very sympathetic to Yahya Sinwar. So a terrible role model, certainly. I just don't see evidence that he's inspiring a lot of actual violence, and this is where the conservative people are saying, well, what if there was a show about, you know, a kid who was a illegal immigrant or refugee from the Middle East knifing white people in Britain, would liberals be offended by that, or would anybody be saying, oh, this is an important educational tool, even though probably based on crime statistics there are more examples of that than the other thing. Crime, the demographics of crime are mostly due to economic status, with overlaps with people of color and immigration status and illegal immigration status. I think poverty being the main motivator, not race, actually. It just correlates with that because there are more people in perilous economic circumstances who happen to look that way. But that would be if you're going by actual trends, you would do that.
The danger, I think, in all of that is getting into realms of racial stereotyping. And I think it is worth noting that the co-creator, or reiterating that the co-creator, says that this series, Adolescence, is not based on any one case. To explore the idea of online misogyny or online attitudes that could be harmful, that I think is an entirely valid exploration to have. And to the point about Keir Starmer and showing it in British schools, I mean, a long time since I was at school, but I remember being shown videos about all sorts of political or social topics that were intended to engender discussion. And it seems plainly worthy of engendering discussion about this topic when we do see, I think, increasingly young men and young women being in very separate online spaces, and partly because of the effects of the algorithm and social media and all of that, where you have content being recommended to the two genders that is very, very distinct from each other, and therefore hollows out some kind of common ground.
The funny thing about that is that in some ways, and this is even Jonathan Haidt's view, who is the leading scholar on how bad social media and smartphones are for kids.
You're not a big fan of Mr. Haidt.
No, I'm a fan of him personally and his work. I disagree with him on this subject, and we've had a number of debates about it. He is one of the most enjoyable people to have conversations with. Even he will say that a lot of the ways that this is a young girl's problem, actually, social media and online behavior and smartphones, and that the way boys interact with each other, for instance, is mainly video games, as long as you're counting that in this category, is actually pro-social and pro-team building. I mean, people think of, the kind of hysterical parent view, oh my God, my kids are playing all these first-person shooters and they're learning to become so violent. Actually, this is also a Steven Pinker theory. The evidence that makes you more aggressive or more violent is zero, and actually, if there's any evidence, it shows the reverse, that a small number of young people who are inclined toward actual violence can use video games as a healthy outlet to not practice real violence.
An escape valve, so
Yes,
to speak.
and for everyone else, it promotes, it is a bonding social thing, like watching sport, but it's actually more interactive than just like watching sports with the guys, because you're actually doing a game. You're playing a storyline. There's video games have gotten really sophisticated. I'm a fan of video games, as our viewers know, and that it's actually teen girls whose online behavior is all like based on comparing personal appearance, where you do get the depressive effects. That said, pornography is another category, and I think even I, as libertarian as I am, conclude that there are, I think, some negative, they're hard to address, impacts of how available pornography is to kids, young boys, at so easy and immediately, and so much a young age. You know, you used to have to look for your dad's Playboy something hidden in the attic, and now it's just like with a touch of a button, and some of it is violent, some of it is giving experts say a warped perspective on what sex is like that might not be helpful to kids.
And I mean, I think that to your point about the video games and all of that, yes, I understand that in every generation there's always scares about, there's
and that's a major
rock and roll was going to destroy the fabric of society.
And that's a major motivator of my philosophy on this topic, is remembering that all of those panics came to naught.
Right. Now, that being said, why there should, I do think that the fact that there are these Andrew Tates of the world out there, not only saying appalling things, but profiting from essentially selling that version of masculinity to young boys, I think that is deeply, deeply unhealthy. Now, would I ban him from doing it? Not unless he's convicted of other unrelated criminal offences. But I think that it is certainly a thing that is worthy of concern and discussion.
I think kids need, a lot of boys need healthy masculine role models. I think the solution for a lot of them, everybody's different, right? They're feminine kids, that's fine too. But it's not to say that there's something wrong with masculinity or you should be less, that kind of thing, but just healthy masculine role models. It is good. Like over time it's become, we downplay or forget how regular the experience of like routine violence was for young men up until very recently. Like it used to be common to get really, really beaten up at school was like an experience a lot of young people had, or even to get in like bar fights if you're older. Our tolerance for that level of violence just in general has gone way, way down to the extent we all reacted with shock and horror when Will Smith just slapped Chris Rock on stage. That level of violence used to be extremely common. Now it's just it's confined to lower and lower parts of our society, and that's a good thing.
It is a good thing, and here I must confess my own age, because when Will Smith did that, firstly, I did think it was humiliating to Chris Rock, even though Will Smith got a lot of bad publicity for it, and secondly, I did think that Chris Rock should have hit him back, which was not I don't
showing
think
your age,
so there we go.
Amazing. All right, that was a fun discussion. Tell us what you think about this film and whether it should be taught in schools and all that sort of thing. Coming up, this is going to be fun. We're going to talk to a professor who is leaving the U.S. to go to Canada because of the rise of authoritarianism here. You won't want to miss that discussion. Well, 3 professors at Yale are moving on not just from the university, but from the United States entirely. The trio, philosophy professor Jason Stanley and history professors Timothy Snyder and Marcy Shore, have taken positions at the University of Toronto this coming fall. All have been critical of President Trump and cite fears that they'll be targeted.
While Snyder and Shore, who are married, left Yale before Trump's inauguration, Stanley announced his departure this week. The moves follow a clear target Trump has put on the Ivy Leagues, including Columbia University. The president cancelled $400 million in federal funding from that school over alleged anti-Semitism. $175 million from the University of Pennsylvania in an unrelated matter, and just this week the administration announced it will review $9 billion in funding for Harvard.
Stanley, an expert on authoritarian regimes, joins us now to elaborate on his move to Canada. Welcome to the show, Professor.
Thank you so much.
I guess my first question is, do you feel safer moving to an area that is going to become our 51st state anyway?
I mean, 2 things about your intro. First, despite the fact that I'm Jewish, I'm not fleeing. I've been noticing that the articles with pictures of Tim Snyder say he's leaving or departing, and the ones with me say I'm fleeing. I think, and secondly, I don't feel targeted. What I'm seeing, our universities are being targeted, and our universities are the best in the world. Academia is a meritocracy. You can't have an international university when non-citizens are afraid of speaking up, or even posting on social media. International students are not going to want to come through our borders. Linda McMahon says she wants to impose patriotic education, which is a kind of, a state ideology on the world's greatest universities. There's an atmosphere of fear that eclipses anything I've seen in my lifetime, although there's always people are always afraid of saying the wrong thing, particularly around Israel. and so part of why I'm leaving is academia is a meritocracy, and I'm seeing great opportunities at the University of Toronto, as long as this administration wants to dismantle the greatest university system in the world. University professors who have the privilege and opportunity to go to other universities will continue to do so.
And I take your point about the leaving versus fleeing thing. You had a job offer in Toronto and you decided to take it. But from other interviews that you've given, I do read that you are very disconcerted by the speed with which other universities, notably Columbia, have capitulated in your judgment. And if I'm understanding your position correctly, you see that as part of a broader fabric where, law firms have reached accommodation with Trump in ways that many people find alarming. And there is this broader bending of the knee. Is that basically where you're coming from on this?
Totally. Yeah, I work in a lot of countries. America is my home. My parents are Holocaust survivors and came here. I love America. But I work on authoritarianism in lots of countries. So I'm not just a Yale professor. I'm also professor at the Kiev School of Economics, where I teach as well. And so this broader fight against authoritarianism it's a global fight we're facing. And so you need to look at other countries to see what the signs are. As Masha Gessen recently wrote in the New York Times, the sort of ICE agents everywhere and the chill and the fear. My grandmother wrote a book about Germany in the 1930s that she published in the 50s that was quite popular, sold tens of thousands of copies. And she talks about the slow, pervasive atmosphere of fear, watching Gestapo agents appear at people's houses. And, whatever you think of immigration, the issue of immigration, and I know Robby's a libertarian and probably doesn't share the same views as the Trump administration, but hauling, students from Tufts University off to Louisiana prisons because they co-authored op-eds in the student newspaper does not seem to me to be some kind of macho display of power. It seems just authoritarian. It seems just authoritarian, however we describe it. It is authoritarian.
Yeah.
And in the face of that, I want to see our democratic institutions stand up and say, this is, these are supposed to be the greatest universities in the world. They're supposed to work together. Our law firms are supposed to work together. Why all this fear?
Yeah, as you point out, there is plenty that I personally disagree with the Trump administration on having to do with this. I have strongly condemned the targeting of students for deportation for merely speaking out and disagreeing with Israel's policy. I think that makes absolutely no sense. Is not even reflective of the actual debate that takes place on both the right and the left about what our policy should be with respect to the Israeli government. I absolutely condemn that and think that's very bad. But for the sake of argument on this show, I think a conservative would respond to what you said earlier about our universities being places of meritocracy and say, well, wait a minute, Harvard University, for instance, was sued for discriminating on a racial basis against certain students, Asian students including, and they're saying they want billions of dollars in government funding. Are they entitled to billions of dollars in government funding? Can't the government say, well, if you're going to get this funding from us, you have to do these things, which is well in keeping, by the way, as I'm sure you're aware, with how both the Biden and Obama administrations handled elite universities with letters based on Title IX guidance saying we want some of your, and touching on due process and free speech also in terms of how gender-based misconduct should be handled and other topics. No university at any point, not a single one of them, stood up to those administrations either and said, no, we think you're infringing on some really basic cardinal liberal values and we're going to fight you on this. They said, no way, we want that money, whatever you say. So really I see a lot of continuation, not a unique new authoritarian edge to this.
Right, Robby, I follow your work, and I know you think that. And I'm not going to defend excesses of wokeness or whatever. That's not what I'm here to do. But you and I both know that both siding what's happening is wrong, that this extreme attack on universities for billions and billions of dollars of funding is wrong. And two wrongs don't make a right in any case. I'm a philosophy professor, I can tell you that. Sophisticated information. And there are plenty of reasons for wanting racial diversity on campuses. Take medical schools, for instance. We know from the UC Davis medical, do you want doctors to have doctors with no cultural understanding of their populations? Do you want a doctor? Is it really the way to pick a doctor that they just do the best on MCATs? I happen to know a lot of doctors. Doctors, empathy is required, understand. There's all sorts of things that are required. We have different cultural institutions in a democracy. We need to represent diverse perspectives. That doesn't mean that that doesn't mean that, there aren't mistakes, but this is what we're seeing now with the attacks on speech, particularly regarding Israel's war in Gaza, which, by the way, many Jewish students were protesting, is like nothing I have ever seen. I asked my students in my class yesterday how many of them had Jewish friends at Yale who were in the encampments protesting Israel's actions, and almost every student raised their hand.
And in relation to that particular point, I mean, I'm frankly, I think, more sympathetic to your outlook than perhaps Robby is. But in relation to that issue of the utilization of the charge of anti-Semitism, that seems to be utilized firstly to dampen debate about Israel and particularly in relation to Gaza, but also to be sort of set as a premise or predicate for much more sweeping government action against the freedom of universities, right?
Absolutely. Trump tweeted, we're going to stop illegal protests. So the protests we saw last year were nothing like the anti-war protests in Vietnam. Those were much more intense. They took over buildings, especially in Colombia. So, of course, this is a response to Colombia's history as a site of anti-war protests. Protests, by their nature, are often illegal. So this is students are the source of democratic resistance, both on the right wing and left wing side. We have robust conservative institutions at Yale. The Buckley Center, the Federalist Society, and Yale Law School, and we have robust progressive institutions. So universities are sites of dissent, and I disagree with Robby that conservatives support this kind of thing. I think conservatives do not support this kind of thing, and this is an authoritarian movement and not a conservative movement, and certainly not a libertarian movement. So I think in this moment, there has to be some unanimity. And the pretext of anti-Semitism, and more Jewish leaders are pointing out, places American Jews into danger, because it's predicated on the anti-Semitic stereotype that we Jews control the institutions. So it's strengthening that stereotype, and it's intentionally employing it. Remember, these are the same folks who talk about George Soros's conspiracy, George Soros as a shadowy figure, and focus on great replacement theory, which let's recall in Madison Grant in his The Passing of the Great Race, which lays out great replacement theory and influenced Adolf Hitler, his 1916 book. Polish Jews were among the main examples, or the main example, of people who were going to poison the blood of our nation, as the Nazis later said.
Professor Stanley, thank you for joining us to elucidate your perspective, not my perspective, but it's why we have a range of viewpoints on the show. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Robby. Thank you.
Coming up, New York City Mayor Eric Adams had an interesting announcement and a change of heart. We will discuss. Stay tuned. New York City Mayor Eric Adams made a major announcement this morning.
Here he is.
But the values of a working class base, pro-public safety, pro-worker, pro-quality of life, are still there, standing strong, even if many who share them have left the party. Those are my values, New York's values, and I will always fight for them. I had hope to fight for them again in the Democratic primary for mayor, and more than 25,000 New Yorkers signed my Democratic primary petition. But the dismissal of the bogus case against me dragged on too long, making it impossible to mount a primary campaign while these false accusations were held over me. But I'm not a quitter. I'm a New Yorker. And that is why today, although I am still a Democrat, I am announcing that I will forego the Democratic primary for mayor and appeal directly to all New Yorkers as an independent candidate in the general election.
A judge dismissed the corruption charges against Adams with prejudice on Wednesday. In other words, President Trump's DOJ will not revive the charges. Adams had been indicted on 5 charges last September. Those included bribery and fraud, where he was accused of receiving more than $100,000 in travel perks and illegal campaign contributions.
After meeting with border czar Tom Homan, Adams vowed in February to reopen an ICE facility at Rikers Island. Adams and the Trump administration deny there was a quid pro quo deal between them, resulted in Adams getting the charges dropped.
Adams does appear to be getting cozier with the Trump administration on some ideological issues. Here he is on comedian Andrew Schultz's podcast on Wednesday.
I don't want to sound conspiracy theory, but there's a permanent government. There are people that see presidents and mayors come and go. Their attitudes will wait you out. You know what book is a great book, man? Everybody should read the book, Kash Patel's Government Gangsters.
Okay.
You should
him on the pod.
Yeah, you should read that book, man.
Okay.
Cash breaks this down.
What is he? And is this what
he's now the FBI director?
Of course.
Former mayoral candidate Andrew Yang wrote on X, Eric Adams just pushed back the date of his loss by 5 months. Maybe Trump will give him a job. I don't think either of us are huge Eric Adams fans, Robby.
No.
And this seems a fairly transparent acknowledgement that he was going to get beaten in a Democratic primary, perhaps by Andrew Cuomo, who neither of us are also huge fans of.
Really don't like Andrew Cuomo. I don't like either of them. This is an interesting matchup.
But he's the front runner. Cuomo's the front runner at this point. The point really is Adams is way behind in the polls. There's a big yawning gap between Cuomo and him. He is obviously under a cloud. Whether you accept that it was a quid pro quo or not with Trump, it has obviously hampered Adams's popularity to an enormous extent in New York. And so he's making this, frankly, to me, rather desperate bid to try to position himself as an independent. He says he's still going to be a Democrat, but I guess position himself as the sort of martyred outsider, even though he's the incumbent mayor, and say, vote for me on that basis.
It's going to be a really tough sell. New York City is home to 3.3 million registered Democrats, 1.1 million independents, and just over 500,000 Republicans. So that's why winning the Democratic primary is basically just winning the election. It can happen that you can run as an independent and catch fire and peel off. He's got to hope he peels off some of those Democrats who maybe they're frustrated with Andrew Cuomo. It's just like, but aren't they also frustrated with Eric Adams? Right. I could see someone else mounting an independent bid perhaps and defeating someone like Andrew Cuomo, who is such a divisive figure and had to resign as governor for two very different but both very serious scandals, the sexual misconduct scandal involving a number of women, and also the handling of COVID, and including the nursing policy death, which he very obviously tried to cover up in order to inflate his own record as a hero of COVID. Really awful, awful stuff. However, Eric Adams has his own baggage, is now becoming very associated actually with Trump and the right in a dynamic that I find very perverse, and I have urged Trump people to stay away from, where a Democrat gets caught doing something bad and then says, oh no, the deep state targeted me too, boo-hoo, poor me, and now gets to be a right-wing celebrity.
Weaponization of the justice system when they are charged.
It's going to create some real perverse
Bob Menendez in New Jersey had trod a similar path.
Rod Blagojevich walked, so Menendez could run.
And to your point about New York, where I lived for several years when I first came to the US, it's not impossible, nor are you suggesting it's impossible, to win as an independent or someone with a Republican history. I mean, obviously Rudy Giuliani back in the day was Republican mayor. Michael Bloomberg, I forget exactly, at one point he was a Republican and then he was an
He won as a Republican initially.
Yeah. But someone like Bloomberg, for example, his whole appeal to the electorate of New York City was a sort of managerial kind of wonkish competence. It's very difficult for Eric Adams to make that case when he's both mired in these allegations of corruption and whenever nobody really sees him as some like genius, innovative organizer or operative.
I think the question becomes, how does his exit from the Democratic primary affect that race? And it may not be immediately apparent how, because there are other people in that race as well, who are better liked certainly by a lot of liberals I know, because as we've just said, neither Eric Adams nor Andrew Cuomo are exactly appealing figures to a lot of people who follow politics closely. There's a Democratic socialist in the race. There's another candidate. But if for some reason Eric Adams and Andrew Cuomo were splitting the vote of really plugged-in people, then this is actually going to hurt those candidates who maybe wanted another big name in to draw fire from the other big name. Also, isn't it like a ranked voting system that I don't even quite understand how it works? That's what, because it was close between Andrew Yang, who ran against Eric Adams. Yang, who's someone a lot of our viewers quite like, that we've interviewed on the show a number of times, that I was kind of pulling for, if for no other reason than I like his openness, at least to off-the-wall ideas and even some libertarian ideas. But he got done in by that ranked voting system.
It's a transfer system essentially, where your second and third preference matter if your first preference doesn't carry the day. But I do think that it's just probably the Adams announcement, I think, may make a Cuomo morality more likely, because now, I mean, it seems to me Cuomo's in very pole position to win the Democratic nomination, and maybe Adams gets some votes from a kind of middle ground or right-leaning thing. So it's looking quite positive for Andrew Cuomo, despite the fact that we don't look very positively on Andrew Cuomo.
I am shocked. I can't believe he's going to succeed at this comeback, but I agree with you that is now by far the most likely scenario.
We'll see.
Up next, conservatives are blasting Politico over what they said about Luigi Mangione and the Trump administration. Stay tuned. Luigi Mangione, the man accused of killing United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, is making headlines once again. U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi announced on Tuesday Mangione's murder of Brian Thompson, an innocent man and father of two young children, was premeditated, cold-blooded assassination that shocked America. After careful consideration, I have directed federal prosecutors to seek the death penalty in this case as we carry out President Trump's agenda to stop violent crime and make America safe again.
Mangione, a 26-year-old Ivy League graduate, belongs to a prominent real estate family in Maryland. He is facing separate federal and state murder charges. Mangione's lawyer, Karen Friedman Agnifilo, said on Tuesday the Justice Department has moved from the dysfunctional to the barbaric.
The announcement sparked reactions from many in the mainstream media. The View's co-host Sunny Hostin had this to say. Let's watch.
This is unusual, actually, for the Justice Department. Basically, there is something that you generally have to go through. You go through Main Justice, you go through the U.S. Attorney's Office of the Southern District of New York. There are meetings that are held. There are standards that need to be met, and then it goes to the Attorney General. And so it seems like she's leapfrogged. Yeah, she's really leapfrogged the enshrined process for a death penalty case, which is the most serious case. I was one of those federal prosecutors that doesn't believe in the death penalty, and so I didn't try death penalty cases. But I will say this, he's facing state and federal charges. And so generally, when there's a state like New York that doesn't have the death penalty, the federal government doesn't usurp that. They try the federal case later, and then they don't seek the death penalty because New York doesn't generally seek the death penalty. So it just seems like an assault on the process for me. It just seems like the Attorney General is acting really against sort of our institutional standards, which is what this administration is doing.
The View hosts also spoke about Mangione's popularity, which might lead to a political backlash if the death penalty is pressed. Let's watch.
He's kind of become a cult hero. I don't think it's right on circles on the left and some parts of the right that see him as this sort of populist warrior.
Why is
I don't
on the
agree
left?
with
Why
that.
isn't it on the left? It's just it's about
taking
healthcare.
on a.
Yeah,
but I don't want to amplify because I disagree with it.
Far right and far left
meet
on
anti-corporation.
Murder is bad no matter what. But all I'm saying is that politically it could be a backlash against Republicans.
I don't think that.
Give him the death penalty.
The far right and the far left meet when it comes to corporate greed, and so this was something that united the extremes on both ends.
Politico, in Tuesday's edition of The Playbook, mentioned Mangione's death penalty news under the title, How Trump Loses Gen Z.
Many on the right blasted Politico for that headline. Daily Caller White House correspondent Reagan Reese wrote on X, Playbook becomes more insufferable each day.
American Commitment President Phil Kerpen wrote, Politico is so hopelessly millennial.
And RNC senior advisor Gates McGavick also chimed in, highly recommend that whoever came up with this framing go outside and touch some grass. Yeah, I don't think they're going to lose Gen Z over whether they do or do not execute Luigi Mangione. I also would say that I am personally indifferent to that course of action. I am neither
indifferent to putting a man to death, Robby.
Who is absolutely guilty, and there is no doubt whatsoever that he did it.
I thought we might find some libertarian, liberal common ground on opposition to the death penalty, but we don't, obviously.
Well, we agree. I would not have the death penalty because I would just not give the government this power, because there have been cases, we now know, where they executed someone who was innocent. And obviously also imprisoning someone for life is a bad thing to do to an innocent person, but you can make it up to someone if you haven't, you can pay them off to some degree. You can't do anything for someone you've already killed.
Right.
So for that reason, I oppose it not on moral grounds, not on philosophical grounds, but just on the practical grounds that the government does make mistakes, and you can't undo a mistake of that magnitude to the same degree you can undo a mistake of life in prison. However, in cases where the guilt is just so obvious and overwhelming, where there's video footage and there's no, I don't think he has some right to it's not like a moral opposition to him dying as a result of having killed someone. So I will shed no tears for them doing it in this case. I felt the same way about the Boston bomber, for example. I think it's better to reserve the death penalty for cases of socially scarring, bad violence, maybe not just the murder. This is kind of gross to talk about, but like a mass killing or something like that, it would be appropriate, as in the case with the Boston bomber, where again the guilt is not, he should have due process, entitled to trial by jury, best defense, but there's no question of the guilt. If they execute you, that's fine with me. But so that's where I come down on it.
Yeah, I mean, so I don't believe in the death penalty, period. I many years ago interviewed a man in Ireland, or an Irish man in Britain, who had been wrongfully convicted. There was a movie made about his case, In the Name of the Father. Jerry Conlon, who was in prison for, I think, 14 or 16 years and eventually exonerated and released. That man would have almost certainly received the death penalty had that been part of the picture at that time. I also think in the United States there's a record of black people who are convicted getting the death penalty more readily than white people who are convicted of capital murder. All that being said, I take your point about mass killings, and I was actually struck in looking at the Mangione case that it is really quite unusual in terms of these federal cases. It is the Boston bomber, the guy Dylan Roof, convicted of the Charleston massacre, faces the death penalty. The guy who did the Tree of Life synagogue shooting faces the death penalty. Mangione, look, you got to be careful here. I'm not endorsing him murdering someone, but it was one person whom he killed, and it is more normal for the death penalty to be pressed in the case of mass killings.
Yeah, that's fine with me. If it's life in prison, that's just fine. Actually, my stronger view on the death penalty is that the manner in which we do it is absolutely barbaric and has become more horrific over time, which is a really weird thing to happen, because in most ways our society has become less tolerant of like torture and violence and horror, and like we don't hang, draw, and quarter people anymore. But we have taken a serious backstep in trying to medicalize and make distance the process of ending someone's life. The combination of injections and drugs, for one thing, we don't know that it is not painful. It often fails, and they have to do it again, which is psychologically a form of torture on the person. This is, I'm sorry, this is very direct, but this is not an improvement on just shooting someone in the head. It's not, and they should do it that way.
I mean, as I say, I'm against death penalty, period, but wasn't there a firing squad recently in some states?
There is technically a firing squad option, and there was an example of someone facing the death penalty who elected for that option because it is less horrifying. It is quicker. I mean, the guillotine is associated with the excesses of the French Revolution and just the execution of everyone at random.
Don't go throw guillotine.
Well, no, but it was invented as a less, because they used to, a drunken axeman swinging at you over and over again. You used to, going back to like Tudor England, where Henry VIII was having everybody
off
killed.
With their heads.
Was it Thomas Cromwell, who had a horrific botched execution? People used to bribe the executioner to like, don't drink before you swing the axe. So the guillotine was an improvement on that process. We've made it worse again in order to, I think, make it not our responsibility. This is a medical procedure. Nope. You're killing someone. You should, if you're going to do that, you should take the position that that person deserves to die, and I am right to do that. And if you don't have that position, then don't do it. But don't make it like a medical kind of thing. It's not. It's killing someone.
Gruesome stuff.
All right, up next, we will talk about MSNBC Morning Joe's tanking ratings, a cheerier subject
than the guillotine.
Than the guillotine. Stay with us. Can things get any worse over at Morning Joe? Well, it seems so. MSNBC's Morning Joe lost to CNN's News Central in the coveted 25 to 54 age demographic this past week. This is the first time News Central has beaten out Morning Joe among this sought-after group since 2022. Now, the incredible upset comes months after Morning Joe hosts Mika Brzezinski and Joe Scarborough visited Mar-a-Lago, and just weeks after Donald Trump's November election win.
That's the trip that many say started off their decline. The program lost 39% of its audience since Trump's win, and 46% among that coveted 25 to 54 demo. That's according to reporting from the Daily Mail. Well,
is it time for heads to roll?
Heads to roll.
Refer to a previous segment.
That's a reference. People who are watching this segment in isolation won't know what we're talking about. Is it time for the guillotine to drop?
Yes. But they may be in trouble.
They may be. I mean,
audience decline for sure.
Yeah, and I mean that demographic is very important in TV because that's how you sell ads, or that's who you sell ads against, essentially. You and I have talked before about the Joe and Mika trip to Mar-a-Lago, and my objection to it, or what I thought was damaging about it, was that it seemed to underscore a kind of dishonesty, really, or a fraudulence, because we had heard from that duo in particular for months, if not years before, that Donald Trump was going to be an absolute danger to American democracy. Everything was going to fall apart. He was a dictator in the making, etc. You could still argue that that is true. They did not still argue that that is true. He won the election and off they went to herald a new era of comedy and or maybe comedy as well, but affability and all of that. And I think it just came across as fundamentally fraudulent.
I'm actually not surprised also about them losing out to CNN, which has become more interesting to me in the last couple months. I don't know if that's solely due to my affection for Scott Jennings.
Maybe it is.
It might be, but so based. But they've had other people on in addition to him who have different kinds of sensibilities and perspectives that are more favorable to Trump. And the panel discussions they're having are pretty entertaining. Yeah. And that is, I think, what people in this demographic, to the extent they're going to be watching TV at all in the future, right? Is a dubious prospect. I've basically stopped watching cable news. Like I used to sometimes turn on the TV and just to catch me up on what's going on. I almost never do that now. I still technically have a cable package because I think it would take too much of my time to try to cancel it.
Sure.
So it's available to me.
The
but
power of inertia, Robby. It's too much trouble to change.
I almost never watch, and I'm smack dab in the middle of that demographic. So they're going to have to pivot to streaming and social and take a page out of Rising's books.
Well, exactly.
But that involves discussion with interesting and provocative and spicy and contrarian internet-based personalities. Where I feel like the Morning Joe brand is so boomer and probably a little bit younger than boomer, but and very associated with the Biden years, right? They were the number 1 and 2 Biden boosters of all. They interviewed him multiple times. He saw that as a friendly landing page when he had to, for instance, address the sexual misconduct accusations from Tara Reid. He chose Mika Brzezinski to be the foil for that because he knew she would be gentle, which is fine, but you know what? That time period is over. Yeah. The Biden brand has not aged well. He's not a popular departing foreign president. At least, Obama and Clinton could claim that. Yeah. Biden really can't. And so, where do they go from here? They've not figured out. They could become more Trumpy, but they're not going to go. Right. You can't. Never go half Trump.
Sure. No, I think that's actually a good
Although
point.
If that's true, I'm pretty doomed, I guess.
Well, I guess you're in the slightly Trump skeptical libertarian space. But look, in relation to Morning Joe and cable news generally, there is, to your point about age, like people I think perhaps who don't follow the media business so closely, don't necessarily recognize how old the cable news audience is. The median cable news viewer is like 65 or 66.
Yes.
It is an increasingly old audience, and people who are younger do not get their news by that means anymore. And so that's obviously an existential problem for cable news. More streaming services are coming on board, even from the big broadcasters. NBC and ABC and CBS all have that. But they haven't figured out how to thread that needle yet, and this is just one more example.
And it's kind of remarkable that they haven't figured it out because they have lots of money, they have nice studios and lighting, and they're very good at producing television. Right. They're not. It's almost as if they're not as good at identifying talent or the kinds of talent that appeal to younger people. And also, we're witnessing this dynamic. Like Megyn Kelly just launched her own production company.
Don Lemon, our old friend.
Don Lemon. People who've left some of these organizations have gone off to do more interesting things on their own, whether it be Substack or Rumble or just on X itself. Yeah. We're entering an era where the individual talent is so much more important than the brand, and I guess that's difficult if you are the brand.
Exactly.
To grapple with that reality that you should, if you really want to maximize revenue and success, you should be the junior partner in the relationship with the talent. But that's just not something these old fossils want to deal with.
Well, and it's also the case that it is, I think, common across cable news networks, be it MSNBC or Fox, where there is the singing to the choir, preaching to the choir stuff, where it is very predictable. I mean, one of the reasons why I never watch almost any sort of primetime cable news of any hue is that I know what people are going to say. And actually, I watch a little bit more during daytime, where I think it tends to be more news coverage. So I think that is a problem because, yes, it caters to a specific niche, but it also turns a lot of people off.
well, we'll continue to follow their rising or sinking fortunes. But that does it for us today on our show, which is also called Rising. We really appreciate you tuning in. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you can listen to podcasts. It is Thursday, right? Which means I'm done for the week, but Niall will be back.
Back with our friend Amber Duke.
Tomorrow with Amber. You won't want to miss it. I'm sure it'll be another great show. See you later.